in the harsh, indifferent glow of street. Mary's emergency room, Daniel Alvarez sat hunched over. His work shirt still clung to him, damp with a chilling memory of his daughter's blood. His rough hands, calloused and strong from years of swinging hammers and lifting beams, trembled as he brought the phone to his ear. He dialed Isabella's number for the 12th time, then the 13th. Each ring was a tiny, fitale hope, ending in the flat, empty hum of voicemail. He whispered her name, Isabella, like a ghost of a plea, as if a softer sound might somehow conjure her, from the distant haze of San Diego, from the life she had walked out of years ago. The surgeon's voice stayed steady, but it carried an edge of urgency that sliced straight through Daniel's despair. Mr. Alvarez, we can't proceed without consent from both legal guardians. It has to be your ex-wife. Daniel's chest tightened, a vice clamping around his lungs. He wanted to roar that Lily was his world, his breath, his every sunrise. He was the one who braided her unruly hair, cooked her simple meal, sat through every hesitant piano lesson. Yet in this stark, unforgiving moment, none of it mattered. On paper, Isabella still held a legal claim, and without her signature, the small, fragile life on the operating table drifted further from his grasp. He buried his face in his palms, the salt of his tears mixing with the fine grit of concrete dust still clinging to his skin. A visceral reminder of his unending labor. Around him, nurses hurried like shadow, their charts rustling, gurneys rolling. Parents clutched whimpering children, and monitors chirped their mechanical, indifferent symphony. But to Daniel, the world had shrunk to a suffocating silence, broken only by the echo of Lily's voice in his memory. Daddy, am I good enough? The weight of helplessness pressed down, thick and suffocating, until breathing became a conscious, painful effort. He pictured Lily's bright laughter filling their small apartment, her earnest fingers coaxing shy melodies from the old piano, the way she called him her hero, even when he felt utterly broken. Now, cold red tape stood between him and saving her life. He felt stripped, barren, every ounce of strength he had painstakingly built over years of sacrifice, crumbling to dust. Then, through the blur of his grief, a hand touched his shoulder. It was light, deliberate, yet it held a calmness that cut through the chaos, a warmth that seemed to seep into his very bones. He lifted his head, his vision clearing, to find a woman unlike anyone he expected in this place of raw human suffering. Her blonde hair was gathered perfectly, not a strand out of place. A black coat, rich and elegant, seemed to belong to another world entirely. A diamond ring, quiet yet brilliant, caught the fluorescent light, almost winking. She didn't look down at him with pity, but with something else, something deeper, quieter. A silent recognition he couldn't name. I know that feeling, she said, her voice a low, steady murmur. A subtle caress against his frayed nerve, sitting in a hospital, desperate for someone to show up. And no one did. Her words slipped past the defenses he hadn't even known he was holding, finding the cracks in his heart where loneliness had hidden for years. He blinked at her, unable to speak, unable to comprehend why this stranger, so utterly different from him, would sit beside him now. Charlotte Whitmore didn't move away. Instead, she leaned closer, the scent of something delicate and expensive, yet not overpowering. Reaching him, her tone was soft but certain. A quiet promise, you're not alone anymore. And for the first time that night, Daniel felt the smallest, most fragile flicker of hope. Charlotte sat beside him, her eyes the color of a winter sky, tracking the nervous rhythm of his trembling hands. For a moment, the sterile hum of street Mary's faded, and she was transported back to Denver, to another pristine, antiseptic-scented waiting room. Heavy with fear, she could still recall the cold press of the pen in her fingers, as she signed the papers that would transform David's organs into lifelines for stranger. He had slipped away while she sat alone, in a chair much like this one, praying for a miracle that never came. No one had touched her shoulder then. No one had told her she wasn't alone. Looking at Daniel now, his shirt streaked with what was undeniably blood, his eyes hollowed by a despair so profound it felt like her own. Charlotte felt the sharp, familiar sting of recognition. Pain, after all, spoke no language of wealth or class. It was the singular, raw currency that made strangers kin. She reached into the inner pocket of her coat, pulling out her phone. Its polished, expensive case gleamed under the harsh hospital light, a stark contrast to Daniel's worn boot. "Henry," she whispered, her voice tightening with an urgency her attorney rarely heard. "I need you at street. Mary's right now. A little girl's life depends on it." On the other end, Henry Cole, her trusted confidant and legal counsel for years, didn't hesitate. He had managed Charlotte's extensive affair, from foundation grants to the intricate details of her estate. But he had never heard her voice quite like this. "Urgent. Breaking. Alive with something beyond mere business." She quickly explained the harrowing situation. A father ensnared by legal red tape, an absent mother unreachable, a child bleeding behind closed doors. Henry promised to make calls, to push through paperwork, to find a judge if he had to, no matter the hour. Daniel watched her, his brows furrowed with suspicion, a deep-seated distrust that someone adorned in silk and diamonds could genuinely care about a construction worker's child. He opened his mouth to speak, but Charlotte gently shook her head, a silent command. "Save your strength for her," she said, her gaze steady, unwavering. "Let me handle this." And so, while Daniel sat, his face once more buried in the rough fabric of his palms, Charlotte began to pace the hallway. Her voice, calm but commanding, resonated through the sterile air as she spoke to Henry. to the hospital administration, to anyone who would listen. Her presence, her sheer will, seemed to subtly shift the very air around them, turning insurmountable obstacles into startling possibilities. For the first time in hours, Daniel felt the ground beneath him steady, a solidness he hadn't realized he'd been craving. A nurse approached. Clipboard in hand, her expression notably softened. Mr. Alvarez, we've received authorization. The surgery can proceed. Daniel exhaled. A ragged gasp that was almost a sob. His knees felt weak, threatening to buckle. But Charlotte's hand was there again, instantly, firmly, grounding him. The relief was overwhelming, a tidal wave that almost drowned him. But so too was the disbelief. He turned to her. Words tangled in his throat. Why would you do this for us? Charlotte looked at him, her eyes reflecting the deep, quiet weight of her own memory. Because once, I needed someone to do it for me, she whispered, her voice catching just slightly, and no one came. She steadied herself quickly, not wanting pity, only truth. I couldn't save David, but maybe, just maybe, I can help you save Lily. In that moment, something unspoken, profound, passed between them. A thread, woven from shared grief and unexpected courage, from deep loss and the faintest spark of hope. Two worlds had collided in the most unlikely of places, a penthouse widow and a construction worker, bound by nothing but the raw, unvarnished ache of love for someone they couldn't bear to lose. Daniel lowered his head, unable to trust his voice, but he didn't need to. The silence between them said enough, and as the doors to the operating room swung open, Charlotte remained by his side, no longer a stranger, but something more, a witness, an anchor, perhaps even the first fragile sign that he wasn't as utterly alone in this relentless fight as he had always believed, long before the screech of tires, before the desperate, agonizing night at Street, Mary's. Daniel Alvarez's life had already been carved by sacrifice. He was 34, a construction worker whose days began before the city stirred. The alarm a distant hum at 5. He would rise quietly in their modest apartment on the edge of Chicago, each movement hushed, careful not to disturb Lily until the aroma of breakfast filled their small kitchen. Most mornings it was scrambled eggs or pancakes, sometimes just toast and fruit, but always prepared with a meticulous care that whispered to a little girl she mattered more than anything else in the world. When Isabella had walked away 2 years earlier, she'd left behind only a hastily scrawled note and a frightened child, weeping inconsolably on her bed. Addiction had pulled Isabella down a path Daniel could not follow, no matter how desperately he wished Lily could still have a mother. That night, when his daughter, through her tears, had asked, "Am I not good enough for her to stay?" "Daddy!" His heart had cracked in a way that had never fully healed. From that agonizing moment, Daniel had made himself a silent, fierce promise. He would love Lily enough for 2 parents. He would never let her question her worth again. Every afternoon after work, Daniel would scrub off the grit and dust of the construction site in a gas station restroom, trying to erase the day's toil before heading to the community music center. There, he would sit on an old wooden bench, posture straight, hands folded, while Lily's small fingers coaxed halting melodies from the piano keys. Other parents scrolled through phones or checked watches, their attention distant. But Daniel never took his eyes off her. Each tentative note was a victory, each shy smile a precious reminder of why every overtime shift, every aching muscle, was worth it. Back home, evenings belonged entirely to them. Sometimes it was grappling with math homework at the kitchen table, sometimes patching a rip in her school uniform with his clumsy, strong fingers. Always, it ended with a story. Daniel would sit at the edge of her bed, reading tales in a soft blend of English and Spanish, his voice a low rumble even when exhaustion threatened to drag him under. Lily would giggle when he gave characters silly accents, and on the hardest day, that sound was the only thing keeping him going. A fragile, vibrant lifeline. Neighbors whispered admiration for the young father, who seemed to have aged a decade in 2 years. His hands were perpetually calloused, his back often sore, but his devotion never wavered. Friends at the job site teased him about never dating, pointing out the quiet widow from the first floor who always seemed to invent excuses for Daniel to stop by. He only smiled politely, shaking his head. "Lily needs me," he would say, though deep in his gut, it was more than that. His heart bore scars, raw and deep, and he had no room left for risks that might hurt her again. Yet even in his weariness, Daniel carried himself with a quiet pride. He wasn't rich, wasn't polished, but when Lily looked at him with those wide, trusting eyes, full of adoration, he felt like the luckiest man alive. She was his reason for every early morning, every late night, every sacrifice. And though the world often dismissed him as just another labor in a hard hat, to Lily, he was everything. Her protector, her teacher, her best friend. That was the man Charlotte Whitmore had found in the hospital waiting room, broken and desperate, yet still fighting. And as fate would have it, the same love that had carried him this far was about to change both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. After the surgery, when the tension finally gave way to a profound, bone-deep relief, Daniel fully expected Charlotte Whitmore to simply melt back into her world of penthouses and polished boardrooms. People like her didn't linger in places like his. Yet, she came back the very next morning, a soft, hesitant smile on her face, carrying a stuffed bear almost as big as Lily, and a stack of colorful children's books tucked neatly under her arm. She didn't arrive with the air of a distant benefactor. She came like someone who truly, deeply wanted to know how a little girl was healing. Lily's eye, still a little shadowed, but sparking with life, lit up when Charlotte entered her hospital room. She clutched the plush bear against her small chest, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Charlotte pulled a chair close to the bed and began to read, her voice a gentle current that filled the sterile room with an unexpected warmth. When Daniel excused himself to grab coffee or speak with the doctors, he would return to the quiet music of their laughter. Charlotte leaning in, her blonde hair brushing Lily's forehead as the little girl pointed at pictures, her face alive with joy. When Lily was finally discharged, Daniel braced himself for the connection to fade, to become another bittersweet memory. But it didn't. Charlotte texted to check in. Sometimes just a few sparse words. How is she feeling today? Did she smile? Sometimes long enough for their exchanges to feel like genuine conversations. She called on video in the evenings, praising Lily's latest drawings, gently reminding her to do her stretches for physical therapy. And when Daniel's overtime shift made it impossible to take Lily to her first piano lesson after the accident, Charlotte volunteered without a moment's hesitation. He wanted to refuse, his pride bristling, but Lily's hopeful, expectant face softened his resistance. That evening, when Daniel came home, utterly exhausted from the sight, he opened the door to a smell he hadn't encountered in years. Sweet, warm, like a cherished memory of childhood. He froze at the doorway to the kitchen. There, flour dusted across the counter like fresh snow. Lily stood on a chair in an apron far too big for her, her cheeks smudged with dough. Beside her, Charlotte, sleeves rolled up, a matching apron tied neatly around her waist, guided Lily's small hands as they pressed cookie cutters into the soft dough. For a moment, Daniel couldn't move. The scene was so utterly ordinary, yet so profoundly foreign to his carefully constructed world. The sight of his daughter, laughing carefree with another adult who cared enough to simply be there, caught him off guard. A sudden, unexpected ache in his chest. He leaned against the doorframe, silent, watching the two of them giggle over a misshapen cookie that looked more like a cloud than a star. Charlotte finally noticed him, her cheeks coloring slightly with a flush of embarrassment. We decided to bake to celebrate her lesson, she said softly, brushing flour from her finger. Her eyes, meeting his, held a vulnerable question. Sorry about the mess. Daniel shook his head, his throat tight, a knot of emotion. It's fine, he managed, though his voice cracked. What he truly wanted to say was, thank you. For the cookies, for the laughter, for making our kitchen feel like a home again. Lily beamed, holding up a tray of uneven shapes. Daddy, we're making dessert. Charlotte says I'm a natural. He smiled, though his eyes burned with an unexpected wetness. It had been a long, solitary time since anyone besides him had stood in that kitchen with Lily. Longer still since he had seen his daughter's world feel so abundantly full. And as Charlotte laughed, flour still dusting her cheek, Daniel realized something he hadn't dared to feel in years. Hope that maybe, just maybe, their lives didn't have to stay so small. A week later, Charlotte surprised them with an invitation. Why don't you come over for dinner? She asked gently, as if acutely aware of how unusual the question sounded, how it bridged two vastly different worlds. Daniel hesitated, but Lily's eyes widened with unadulterated excitement. And so, on a cool Friday evening, he found himself standing with his daughter at the entrance of a high-rise penthouse, its towering windows overlooking the shimmering expanse of Lake Michigan. The doorman greeted Charlotte by name, a subtle deference, as she ushered them inside. The moment Daniel stepped through the gleaming glass doors, he felt the immense weight of the space press against him. Marble floors reflected the glow of recessed lighting, and walls of glass stretched from floor to ceiling, framing the breathtaking, endless expanse of the lake and the glittering city beyond. It was beautiful, undeniably so, yet it felt cold, too perfect, as if no child's laughter had ever truly echoed against these pristine walls. Lily, with her natural curiosity, darted to the window, pressing her small hands against the cool pane. Daddy, look, you can see all the boat. Her voice, bright and clear, carried across the cavernous room. But Daniel stood awkwardly by the door, tugging at the cuff of his worn work jacket. He didn't belong here, not with his calloused hands and boots still dusty from the job site. Charlotte seemed to sense his unease, his quiet retreat. She placed a hand lightly on his arm, a touch that was both delicate and grounding, sending a faint warmth through his skin. Beautiful view, isn't it? She said. Her smile wore, yet tinged with something else he couldn't quite decipher. But it doesn't feel like home. Her honesty startled him. He looked at her, truly looked, then back at the polished surfaces and carefully curated artwork. He thought of his tiny apartment, cluttered with Lily's drawings taped to the fridge, her piano book stacked haphazardly on the counter, the faint, comforting scent of tortillas and laundry soap filling the air. That was home. This was something else entirely. Later, when Lily had finally drifted to sleep in the quiet comfort of the guest room, Charlotte led Daniel onto the expansive balcony. The city stretched before them, an endless sea of lights flickering against the velvet canvas of the night sky, the lake dark and mysterious beyond. The wind off the water carried a crisp chill, but Daniel barely noticed. He leaned on the cool railing, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, and for the first time in a long time, he spoke the truth. He usually kept buried deep within him. Isabella left because she said I wasn't enough, he said quietly, his voice raw, stripped bare. Not enough money, not enough patience, not enough of anything. And maybe she was right. I work with my hands. I come home covered in dust. I don't have much to give Lily, except me. And I worry every day that even that isn't enough. His voice wavered, the vulnerability in it, a palpable thing. Aching and exposed. Charlotte's gaze softened. She turned toward him. her blonde hair catching the city's distant glow, framing her face in soft light. Her voice was a mere whisper, yet it resonated deeply within him. "You're wrong. I see the way Lily looks at you. She doesn't need more. She just needs you." Their hands rested side by side on the cold, smooth railing, and when their fingers brushed, neither pulled away. It was the lightest of touches. A fleeting spark, yet it carried the immense weight of something fragile and real, a spark of trust. A fragile thread of connection between two broken hearts standing high above the city, daring, just barely, to believe that maybe they weren't as unworthy or as alone as they had thought. Daniel looked at her then, truly saw her, and for the first time, he saw not a billionaire widow, but a woman searching for a home, for connection, as much as he was. And in that quiet moment on the balcony, with the city lights shimmering below like scattered diamonds, a seed of something new began to take root. Deep within him, for a while, life began to feel almost ordinary again. Touched by a new, gentle gray, Charlotte visited often, her presence a quiet balm. She helped Lily with homework, joined them for dinners in the cramped but warm apartment. And sometimes, after Lily had drifted off to sleep, she would sit beside Daniel on the sofa, the soft hum of the night settling around them. For Daniel, those evenings felt fragile but profoundly real, like pieces of a life he had stopped believing he could ever have. The air between them, thick with unspoken understanding, grew warmer, heavier, charged with a subtle electric current, a glance that lingered too long, a shared smile that deepened into something more profound. Then, one afternoon, while sorting through paperwork for a small construction business he had been trying to start with a co-worker, Daniel came across a thick envelope he hadn't noticed before. Inside were medical invoices from Street. Mary's, each stamped in bold red letters, paid in full. The total stared back at him. A staggering $70,000. His chest tightened. A sharp, cold grip. As his eyes raced over each page, hospital charger, surgical fees, medication, all covered. None by hit. He sat frozen at the kitchen table, the low hum of the refrigerator filling the sudden, deafening silence. Slowly, anger began to rise, sharp and hot, a poisonous bloom. He didn't need to guess who had done this. That evening, Daniel showed up at Charlotte's penthouse, the stack of papers, crisp and accusing, clutched in his hand. His boots echoed too loudly against her polished marble floors as he strode into the living room where she sat with a glass of wine, bathed in the soft glow of the city lights. "You paid these..." His voice was low, strained, but it shook with a raw, restrained fury. He dropped the invoices onto the gleaming glass coffee table, the papers scattering like accusations. Charlotte looked up, startled, her eyes wide with a sudden, dawning comprehension. "Daniel." Yes, I did. Lily needed the best care. I had the resources. It was nothing for me. Nothing for you," he repeated, his voice cracking, thick with disbelief and resentment. $70,000? Do you have any idea what that number looks like to me? Do you know what it feels like to find out you've been turning me and my daughter into your charity project? Her eyes widened further, wounded, betraying a flicker of pain. "That's not what this is. I wasn't treating you like a project. I care about Lily. I care about you." "No," Daniel snapped, pacing across the pristine floor, his fists clenching, the movement sharp and agitated. "You care about how we make you feel. The rich widow, swooping in to rescue the poor construction worker and his little girl. It makes you feel needed, doesn't it? It makes you feel like you're fixing something you couldn't fix with David." Charlotte recoiled, her face paling, as if struck. "Don't you dare reduce this to pity. Don't you dare think I'm here out of guilt." Her voice trembled with suppressed emotion, but there was steel in it, an unwavering resolve. "I love being with you. I love being with Lily. That isn't about money." Daniel stopped pacing, his shoulders heaving, his breath ragged. He stared at her, pain etched deep into his face, a mask of betrayal. "Then why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me enough to be honest? Do you know what it feels like to wake up and realize I'm not a father providing for my daughter? I'm just a man being carried by someone else's wallet." Tears filled Charlotte's eyes, glistening in the soft light. But her words came firm, unwavering. "I was protecting you. Danielle, I knew your pride wouldn't let you accept help. I was trying to make life easier for Lily without making you feel the weight of it. It's not about pride," he whispered, his voice raw, edged with a deeper hurt. "It's about trust. And you broke it." The silence stretched, heavy and unbearable, a chasm opening between them. Finally, Daniel grabbed his jacket, his boots striking the marble floor with deliberate, harsh punctuation. "I should have known this was too good to be real," he said hoarsely, his gaze meeting hers one last. "Pain time. People like you don't fall for people like me. Unless there's something in it for you." Charlotte's breath caught, a small, choked sound, her hands trembling as she reached out. A desperate, yearning gesture? But he was already gone. As the door closed behind him, the sound echoed through the silent penthouse, leaving her standing utterly alone in a room filled with everything money could buy, and absolutely nothing she wanted. The days after their fight were heavy with silence, each moment stretching into an unbearable eternity. Daniel tried to throw himself back into work, hammering nails until his hands blistered, his muscles screamed, but nothing dulled the persistent ache of losing the fragile bond he and Charlotte had begun to build. He came home each evening to Lily's innocent questions. "Where's Charlotte? Did she call?" And each time, his heart clenched a little tighter, a fresh twist of the knife. He couldn't bring himself to explain, why the woman who had become such a vital, vibrant part of their daily life had suddenly, irrevocably, disappeared. Then came the letter. It arrived in a thick envelope, stamped with ominous legal markings that made Daniel's stomach twist before he even opened it. His eyes scanned the words once, then again, as if reading them differently might somehow change the horrifying meaning. Petition for emergency custody filed by Isabella Martinez. For a long moment, he sat at the kitchen table, the envelope trembling violently in his calloused hands. Isabella, the woman who had walked out on them, who had left Lily crying on her bed with nothing but a terse note, was now demanding to take their daughter away. And she wasn't doing it alone. She had hired Rebecca Walsh, one of Chicago's most aggressive family attorneys, a name Daniel had only ever heard whispered in tones of dread. Associated with bitter divorces and impossible custody battles, the accusations burned on the page, each word a searing brand, exploitation of his daughter's medical situation, financial instability, emotional manipulation. Each line painted Daniel not as the devoted father he had been for years, but as a man utterly unfit to raise a child. And worst of all, Walsh had evidence. Evidence Daniel hadn't even known existed until he found those invoices, paid in full, $70,000, lying in Charlotte's penthouse. Proof. They claimed that Daniel had used Lily as bait, a pawn, to secure money and favors from a wealthy widow. His chest tightened until he thought he might not breathe again. The air stolen from his lung. He imagined a sterile courtroom, where strangers would look at him and see only what the papers dictated. Poor, desperate, opportunistic. He imagined Lily being led away by a mother who hadn't stayed sober long enough to raise her. That night, Daniel called Henry Cole, the one lawyer he knew he could trust after everything with Charlotte. His voice cracked, the words tumbling out in a desperate, tangled mix of anger and raw fear. She's trying to take her from me. Henry. Isabella is saying I'm not fit, that I used my own daughter to get close to Charlotte, that I sold her life for money. Henry's sigh was heavy on the other end of the line. I've seen Walsh work. Danielle. She's ruthless. And with those invoices, she's got leverage. But we'll fight. You've built a life for Lily? Neighbors. Teachers. Everyone knows it. We'll need every voice we can get to testify. Daniel sat at the edge of Lily's bed that night, watching her breathe, her tiny chest rising and falling with the deep, untroubled innocence of someone who had no idea her world might soon be ripped apart. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead, his touch feather light, and whispered, I won't let them take you. I swear I won't. But deep down, in the cold, hollow space where hope usually resided, he knew the truth. With Isabella sober now, with a steady job in San Diego, and with Charlotte gone after their bitter fight, his chances were fragile, tenuous. The system didn't always care about unwavering devotion or boundless love. It cared about paper trails, about appearances, about demonstrable stability, and on paper, Isabella, reborn, looked like a woman on the ride, while Daniel looked like a man drowning. As he turned off the lamp and pressed a soft kiss to his daughter's cheek, Daniel felt the first real chill of fear seep into his bones. The battle for Lily had begun, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if love alone would be enough to keep her. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood, and the sharp, acrid scent of tension. Daniel sat rigid at the defendant's table, his hands clenched so tightly, his knuckles blanched white, his heart thudding a relentless drumbeat against his ribs. Across the aisle, Isabella looked sharp and polished in a navy suit. Her attorney, Rebecca Walsh, standing tall and formidable beside her. To the judge and the curious faces in the gallery, Isabella looked like a woman who had meticulously rebuilt her life. Steady job, clean record, a composed, almost serene demeanor. Daniel knew appearances could lie, but in a courtroom, appearances carried undeniable weight. Walsh's opening arguments were precise, cutting deep. She painted Daniel as a man barely keeping afloat, a father so desperate he had paraded his daughter in front of wealthy strangers. She spoke of unpaid bills, of modest living condition, of how a child deserves stability, not constant sacrifice. Her words were knives dressed in silk, each insinuation designed to wound. Each time she gestured toward him, Daniel felt the sting of being reduced to less than what he was. Stripped bare by her cold, clinical assessment. Henry Cole rose in his defense, calling neighbors and teachers to testify. They spoke with quiet conviction of Daniel's unwavering devotion, how he routinely left work early for piano lessons, how he never missed a parent-teacher conference, how Lily thrived under his loving, meticulous care. Their words were true, heartfelt, filled with genuine affection, but compared to the glossy, professional narrative Walsh spun, they sounded small, almost fragile. Daniel's hope, already frayed, began to unravel further. Then, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom opened with a soft creak, and a hush rippled through the room. Charlotte Whitmore stepped inside. She wore a simple black dress, elegant in its restraint. Her blonde hair pulled back, her face pale, hinting at sleepless nights. For the first time since their bitter fight, Daniel's eyes met her. What he saw there was not pity, not resentment, but an unwavering resolve that took his breath away. When Henry called her to the stand, the room leaned forward, palpable with anticipation. Charlotte's voice was steady, clear, each word ringing with conviction. She told the court about that desperate night in street, Mary's, how she had seen a man fighting with every fiber of his being for his daughter's life, a man who had refused to leave Lily's side for a single moment. She admitted openly, without hesitation, that she had paid Lily's medical bills, not because Daniel had asked, she emphasized, but because she could, and because Lily deserved the best care possible. Mr. Alvarez never sought my money, she said firmly. her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, holding each person accountable for her truth. He never once asked for help. The only thing he ever wanted was the chance to care for his daughter. Her voice softened then, imbued with a deep, resonant emotion that seemed to fill the sterile air. What I gave freely because I cared for them. Because I loved them. Walsh rose for cross-examination, circling like a predator, her voice sharp with implied accusation. Mrs. Whitmore, isn't it true that you were grieving your husband's death? That you sought to fill an emotional void by involving yourself with Mr. Alvarez and his child? Charlotte didn't flinch, her chin lifted, her eyes unwavering. I was grieving. Yes, but Daniel and Lily didn't fill a void. They reminded me what family feels like. That is not something you can buy, or replace, or manipulate. It's love, real love. Her words lingered in the silence that followed. A powerful, undeniable truth. For the first time, Daniel saw a flicker of uncertainty, a crack in Walsh's polished composure. Still, doubt hovered in the air, the balance precarious, painfully so. Then, unexpectedly, a figure rose from the gallery, an older woman, her voice trembling slightly, but strong with conviction, addressing the judge. Your Honor, I am Isabella's mother, and I cannot stay silent? Gasps echoed across the courtroom. She went on, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I love my daughter, but she is not ready to raise Lily. 3 months sober does not erase years of absence. Stability is not a suit you put on for court. I've watched Daniel be the one constant in Lily's life. He is the father she needs, the father she deserves. The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of profound truth through every corner of the room. Daniel's breath caught, a tightness in his chest as if hope had returned. Fragile but astonishingly real. For the first time since the trial began, he allowed himself to believe that the truth, raw and unvarnished, might just be strong enough to save his little girl. The courtroom had grown utterly still, the kind of silence that hums with suspended breath and fervent expectation. Judge Morrison shuffled his papers, his expression grave, as though the weight of the decision pressed on him as much as it did on the families before him. Daniel sat rigid, his hands clasped so tightly, his knuckles were white, his heart a frantic drum within his chest. He could feel Lily's small hand resting inside his, trusting. Whatever the verdict, he prayed she would not see the terror that coiled in his gut. Then, Charlotte rose from her seat in the gallery, the soft click of her heels against the floor echoing like a bell, commanding every eye, every ear. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady but charged with a raw, undeniable emotion. Before you render your decision, I would like to make a statement that may impact this case. The judge arched a brow, a flicker of surprise in his stern gaze. This is highly irregular. Mrs. Whitmore. I know, she answered softly, her eyes flicking to Daniel for a fleeting moment before returning. Resolute. To the bench. But it's necessary. She took a deep, fortifying breath, her hands trembling just enough to betray the storm of emotion inside her. I am formally petitioning this court for permission to adopt Lily Alvarez as my daughter, with her father's full consent. And furthermore, her voice caught, a fragile break. But she pressed on, her resolve unwavering. Mr. Alvarez and I intend to marry, creating a stable, two-parent household for Lily. The words landed like a clap of thunder. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A collective inhalation of shock. Rebecca Walsh shot to her feet, an objection forming on her lips. Isabella's face hardened, contorting with fury, and even Henry Cole looked utterly stunned. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears, a deafening surge of blood as he stared at Charlotte, unable to move, unable to breathe, caught in the sheer, unexpected magnitude of her declaration. Mrs. Whitmore, the judge said, his gavel rapping sharply for order. This is not the proper venue for personal petitions. But Charlotte raised her chin, her eyes bright with unshed tears, yet shining with a fierce, beautiful conviction. With respect, Your Honor, this is the most proper place of all. Because this case is about what's best for Lily. And I'm standing here to say that Lily has already become my daughter in every way that matters. I love her as if she were my own. And I love her father. Her voice, though soft, resonated with a profound, undeniable truth that echoed through the silent room. A promise veiled in a public declaration, not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because together they are my family. And I am willing to put my name, my reputation, my entire life behind that truth. All eyes shifted to Daniel. He rose slowly, his chest heaving, his breath still unsteady, but his voice, though breaking, was clear, carrying across the courtroom. Charlotte, are you sure? After everything, after the mistakes we made. She turned to him then, tears streaming freely down her face, unashamed, radiant. I should have fought for us this way from the beginning. Not with money, with love. And I will never walk away again. The judge looked at Daniel, his gaze sharp, probing. Mr. Alvarez, do you consent to this petition? Daniel swallowed hard, then nodded, his voice thick with emotion, breaking over the single, powerful word. Yes, Your Honor. With all my heart, yes, I want this. I want her. Before the gavel could fall, a small, bright voice broke the charged silence. Lily, who had been sitting quietly beside Daniel, leapt to her feet, her eyes wide with innocent wonder. Does this mean Charlotte gets to be my mom for real? Her joy, pure and unfiltered, rang through the courtroom, a spontaneous, infectious sound. Laughter, soft and relieved, spread across the room, even Judge Morrison's stern expression softening into the faintest, most human smile. He cleared his throat, his tone warmer now. Well, young lady, there are still legal steps to follow. But I must admit, in 20 years on this bench, I've rarely seen such a compelling declaration of family. Daniel reached for Charlotte's hand, his strong, calloused fingers intertwining with her delicate ones, as if they had always belonged together. The weight of the trial, the accusation, the suffocating fear, all of it seemed to fall away in that instant, dissolving into thin air. What remained was a beginning, not the end of a bitter custody hearing, but the breathtaking birth of a family. And for the first time in a long, solitary time, Daniel allowed himself to hope not just for survival, but for profound, boundless joy 6 months later. The chapel at St. Mary's, the very place their extraordinary journey had begun, was dressed in the simplest of ways. White lilies adorned the altar, their delicate fragrance mingling with the scent of old wood. Sunlight, fractured into brilliant hue, filtered through stained glass window, casting ethereal patterns across the pews. Filled with a handful of cherished friends and family, Daniel stood at the front, in a suit borrowed from his best friend at the construction site, his calloused hands fidgeting with the small, velvet box tucked in his pocket, holding the ring. When the heavy doors opened, Charlotte walked down the aisle, radiant in a plain white dress. No glittering jewels, no grand embellishment, just quiet gray. At her side, skipping with unrestrained excitement, was Lily, now their official ring bearer, carrying both rings in a velvet box, as if she had been entrusted with the very secret to their happiness. "You look beautiful," Daniel whispered when Charlotte reached him, his voice catching in his throat. A tremor of awe. She smiled softly, her fingers gently smoothing his crooked tie. "And you," she whispered back, her eyes sparkling. "Clean up better than I expected." The chapel filled with gentle laughter, then quieted to a reverent hush as vows were spoken, each word imbued with years of unspoken longing, of healing, of a love hard-won and deeply cherished. When they kissed, it was a tender, lingering joining, a sacred seal to their journey, a promise of all the intimate years stretching before them. Lily, unable to contain her joy, threw her arms around them both, shouting, "Finally, now we're officially a family." Her words, innocent and true, left not a single dry eye in the room. The celebration afterward wasn't in a grand ballroom or an exclusive hotel. It was in the modest backyard of the house they had just bought. A home near Lily's school, alive with the promise of laughter and shared meals. String light, like captured stars, hung between the old oak trees. Mismatched tables, laden with casseroles, brought by thoughtful neighbors, created a tapestry of community, and the sound of laughter drifted into the soft embrace of the night. Daniel's construction crew sat side by side with Charlotte's foundation board members, an unlikely mix of dusty boots and polished shoes, yet everyone felt inexplicably at home. For the first time, Daniel looked around, his heart swelling, and realized he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was truly, profoundly living. 2 years passed, and life unfolded in ways he never could have imagined. His small construction company had blossomed, now employing 3 full-time workers under his steady lead. Charlotte, her once lonely penthouse firmly behind her, found more joy in drafting community projects and managing a household joyfully alive with a gentle, everyday chaos. And in the warm summer light of their backyard, Lily, now 10 years old, sat at the picnic table, meticulously sorting screws and nails for the birdhouses Daniel taught neighborhood kids to build. She rolled her eyes at his clumsy explanations. "Dad, you're doing it wrong," she teased, her voice brimming with affection, yet utterly confident in her newfound knowledge. Daniel laughed, wiping sweat from his brow. "I've been building longer than you've been alive." "Mika." "Yeah, but I'm smarter," she shot back, flashing him a grin that reminded him so much of her vibrant mother, and yet so much of her own emerging strength. When Charlotte stepped out of the house, one hand resting gently on her rounded belly, the other carrying a pitcher of fresh lemonade, the teasing stopped only for a moment. She glowed in the late afternoon sun, every bit the picture of deep contentment, of hard-won peace. "Your husband is being stubborn again," Lily announced, and Charlotte laughed, a warm, rich sound, as she lowered herself carefully into a chair. "Then your little sister will have to be as opinionated as you," she replied, her eyes twinkling. Daniel knelt beside her, pressing a tender kiss to Charlotte's forehead, then whispered playfully to her belly, "Hear that? Baby girl, your big sister is already plotting against me." Lily folded her arms, pretending to be serious. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm going to be a doctor. Remember? I'm going to fix people who are broken, just like Mom fixed our family." Charlotte's eyes welled with tears, and Daniel's throat tightened. A sudden, fierce rush of emotion at the sound of that one word. Mom, spoken with such casual, absolute certainty 2 years earlier. It had been a fragile hope, a whispered dream. Now, it was simply, beautifully true. As the sun dipped below the houses, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the backyard rang with the joyful sounds of children playing, neighbors talking, and the sweet, comforting chaos of a home built on love. Daniel looked around, his arm held gently around Charlotte, his daughter's laughter filling the air, and knew this was everything he had never dared to dream. Family, he realized, isn't always about blood. Sometimes it is chosen, built day by day with forgiveness, with patience, and with the immense, tender courage to trust again. And in the soft glow of string lights and shared laughter, he understood at last. This was the life he had been building toward all along.